evening to all the participants, ma'am and Samvita. Today, before I go ahead with what happens after conviction, what I want to explain y'all is a stage which comes immediately after the charge sheet is filed. That is plea bargaining and compounding of offences. Yes, before that, Samvita, yesterday there was another query from one of the participants. They wanted me to cover this topic of protest petition. So I just decided last evening that I will also explain what exactly is a protest petition. So I will first explain you all what is a protest petition. Now, there can also be a scenario when the charge sheet is not filed in the court. For example, an FIR is registered against me for, say, commission of theft at a bank. When the police is investigating the matter, they come to a conclusion that it is not me but someone else who has committed an offense of theft. What will they do? They will not file the charge sheet against me because they have not been able to collect enough evidence against me. They will file a charge sheet against some other person. Similarly, there can be a scenario where after investigation, they come to a conclusion that, the particular information which was given to us was a false information. The concerned FIR which came to be lodged is lodged maliciously. There can also be a scenario where the information which has been given to the police is correct, but police could not collect enough evidence during the investigation to prove the guilt beyond reasonable doubt in the court. So in such a scenario also police may decide not to file the charge sheet. There can be a third scenario, neither true nor false. The information which is given can be due to some misunderstanding or a mistake of fact. It is not that the informant wanted to lodge a false complaint. He gave an information in good faith. It is also possible that the information which is given at the police station, the information is true, but it may not say amount to any offense. It can be a civil dispute. So what does the police do in such a scenario? They will not file charge sheet, but they will file a report called as a summary report. A summary, B summary, and C summary. A summary is true but not detected. B summary is a false case. In such a scenario, they can also give a remark, false case with prosecution. So in such a scenario, the complainant will have to face prosecution for giving false information to the concerned police station. C summary is neither true nor false. Now, it is not necessary that the report which is filed by the concerned investigating officer is correct. It is also possible that he may be influenced by the accused to file such kind of a report. Then what right does the complainant have in such a scenario? That is the time when the protest petition comes into play. Protest petition is a representation made by the victim to the court during or after completion of investigation by the police machinery. So it is an opportunity which is granted to the victim or the complainant to raise objections against the conclusions of the investigation made by the police. The said petition, which is called as a protest petition, the term itself will explain you that you're protesting against the decision of the investigating machinery, and therefore you're filing an application. So the said petition is treated as a complaint under section 190 of the Code of Criminal Procedure before the concerned court. So for example, the FIR was registered at Andheri police station. Andheri police station comes to a conclusion that it's a false case. The complainant can file a protest petition in Andheri court against the concerned investigating officer, and he will put his grounds, his arguments in the application, explaining the court as to how the concerned officer is wrong in coming to a conclusion that this FIR is a false FIR. He may probably annex some documents. He can annex whatever proofs that he has to show that the information which he has given is a correct information. Now, after the protest petition is filed, I explained you all this. In what circumstances is a protest petition filed? When an aggrieved person or a complainant is not satisfied with the police report which was filed before the concerned court, such person may move the petition against the negative police report, which is called as a protest petition. Now, after the protest petition is filed before the magistrate, what options does a magistrate have? The magistrate may accept the final report and may reject the protest petition. So a magistrate may come to a conclusion that no, this protest petition is being filed maliciously. It is just to waste the judicial time of the court, and the magistrate may come to a conclusion that no, nothing doing, I am rejecting your protest petition, and the report which has been filed by the police is a correct report. I am accepting the report and the matter is closed. In such a scenario, the complainant will have a right to challenge that order by filing a revision in the sessions court. Secondly, the magistrate may have another option of accepting the final report. So what he does, he accepts the final report of the investigating officer. At the same time, he treats the protest petition as a complaint, and he proceeds with the protest petition as if it's a complaint in accordance with section 200 and 202 of the code. I had explained you yesterday, when you file a private complaint, the procedure is given from section 200. There is another option, third option which a magistrate has. He may accept the protest petition and reject the final report and take cognizance under section 191B of the code. So he will treat this protest petition as an information received in writing and treat it as a complaint. So magistrate has three options. So whenever any complainant or the informant or the victim is aggrieved by the negative report of the police station of the concerned investigating machinery, they have a right to file something called as protest petition. This term protest petition is considerably new. This term never existed 10 years back. Neither will you find this term anywhere in CRPC, IPC or evidence. But this practice has developed and protest petitions are now being filed very, very commonly. But earlier when I joined practice, we never heard of something called as protest petition. Now we'll move to our next topic, plea bargaining. Now plea bargaining is also considerably new to our country. Plea bargaining has been in US for many, many years, which is why probably the disposal rate in USA is much better. In India, plea bargaining was, though it has been considered since many, many years, the amendment was never carried out because maybe the judicial officers in our country, the judiciary and the executive, felt that plea bargaining is something which shouldn't be introduced in our country. The opinion was that just because you have committed an offense and you come and plead guilty doesn't mean that your punishment should be reduced. Now, before I explain you how plea bargaining came in, we should know what is the meaning of plea bargaining. So, I was just telling you all that plea bargaining has been recently introduced by the Amendment Act 2005 and it came into effect in 2006. So plea bargaining is negotiations between the prosecution and the accused, in which the accused agrees to plead guilty to the charges against him in exchange for certain concessions by the prosecution. So I'm harping on the word here, accused. Accused agrees to plead guilty. I am going to explain you all what is compounding of offenses, which is different from plea bargaining. That's why I'm harping on the word here that accused agrees to plead guilty to the charges against him in exchange for certain concessions by the prosecution. Now, what do you mean by certain concessions by the prosecution? Obviously, what he will bargain for is lighter punishment. For example, he is seeking plea bargaining in an offense which is punishable with, say, 4 years or 3 years. He will bargain that I'm pleading guilty. I don't want to undergo the ordeal of trial. Please make the punishment lighter, make it 1 year or whatever. So this is the meaning of plea bargaining. Now chapter 21A of CRPC is named under the heading of plea bargaining, and it encapsulates the provisions from section 265A to 265L. If you go through this chapter, the whole procedure of plea bargaining has been explained in this one single chapter. I already told you this chapter came to be included in CRPC by virtue of Criminal Law Amendment Act 2005, which came into effect from 5th July 2006. Now, the legal framework of India had repelled this concept of plea bargaining. There are these three judgments, which if you can go through at any point of time, it will be nice. Murlidhar Meghraj, Kasambhai Sheikh versus State of Gujarat, and State of UP versus Chandrika. All these three judgments, it was observed that a mere admission of the guilt does not warrant for imposition of a lighter sentence or punishment. So this was the view of the apex court of India, and therefore this plea bargaining was never introduced. But slowly, as you know, it was realized that the pendency of the cases is increasing, and we need to find a way out to reduce the burden in the courts and to reduce the pendency. Probably plea bargaining was introduced. Now, before plea bargaining was introduced, there was already a provision under section 320 of CRPC, which is called as compounding of offenses. Now, compounding of offenses is also very similar. So why was this whole concept of plea bargaining introduced? Now let us see what is compounding of offenses, and then I will come back to this question. 1 minute. Before I go back, come to compounding of offenses, I will also want to just quickly explain you all how the procedure is in plea bargaining. Now, section 265A to 265L explains you the procedure. Now, for example, a charge sheet is filed or a complaint is filed against XYZ. ABC is filing a complaint against XYZ. It could be either a complaint or it could be a charge sheet. But mind you, the offense has to be punishable with less than 7 years. Only then the plea bargaining will be applicable in that particular case. Now, once the complaint or the charge sheet is filed by ABC against XYZ, it is possible that XYZ feels that, oh, I am charged for an offense which is punishable with 5 years. I will have to spend money on a lawyer. I'll have to undergo the whole ordeal of trial, and I never know what happens after that. So he may just feel that in the interest of time, money, I may decide to plead guilty. So what he will do, the accused and the complainant, in presence of their advocates, will have a meeting in the court. Before that meeting is done, it is important for a magistrate to call the accused in the chamber and ask him, or probably in the court, but it should be in camera, and satisfy himself that the concerned accused is making this plea for plea bargaining voluntarily. Because the effect of plea bargaining is that the accused pleads guilty. So ultimately, he will be convicted. It's not that he will be acquitted. He will be convicted, but it will be, the punishment will be in a lighter form. So therefore, it is important for a magistrate to ensure and satisfy himself that the accused is making this plea voluntarily. Once he has satisfied himself, he will ask the parties, that is the complainant, or if it's a charge sheet, it will be the informant. The complainant or the informant, as the case may be, will meet the accused. They will have a meeting and probably they will discuss in what way will the accused compensate the complainant or the informant. It is for the parties to decide in what way they want to settle the matter. Once they both agree on the terms, they will come back to the court and tell them that they have decided to settle the matter on these terms. After that, the accused will enter the box and he will plead guilty and he will bargain for a lesser punishment. Now, I'll tell you all one more thing. If you see section 265A to 265L, there are certain provisions which say that how much less punishment can be given. It is either half of the sentence or one-fourth. Now, to be in practical scenario, most of the magistrates, what they do is they leave the accused on probation, or if the accused has already undergone some sentence in the past when the FIR was registered, probably he would have been arrested and he would have been in custody. In such a scenario, the magistrate passes a judgment that he is guilty of the offense and he is sentenced to the term already undergone. Or probably he will say that if the offense is punishable, say with 3 years, he will say that he is sentenced to imprisonment of say 1 year, and he will leave him on probation. And after maybe 7 to 8 months, he will dispense with the sentence by observing that he has been behaving in a good manner, and therefore his sentence is dispensed. So practically, this is what happens in the court in plea bargaining. Now I'll take you all to compounding of offenses. Now, what is the meaning of compounding of offenses? Compounding of offenses means to establish a compromise between the two parties where the complainant agrees to have the charges dropped against the accused. So if you remember, in plea bargaining, I harped on the word accused agrees to plead guilty. Here in compounding of offenses, it is the complainant who takes the first step and he says that I agree to have the charges dropped against the accused. The power to compound the offense is at the discretion of the victim or the complainant. So the object of section 320 of the code is to promote friendliness between the parties so that peace between them is restored and the matter is disposed of at the earliest. Now, compoundable offenses, section 320, if you see, there are two types of compoundable offenses. One, where compounding can be carried out between the parties without the permission of the court. So the parties can decide to meet and maybe the complainant will say that, look, I don't want to proceed with the matter. Let's make a compounding application. In such a scenario, the permission of the court is not required. On what terms they settle or they decide to settle and compound the matter is between them to decide. Court is not involved in any talks. Now there is another kind of offense where court's permission is required before compounding. Obviously, the difference is if the offense is not of a serious nature and it is personal in nature. It is not affecting the socio-economic sector. In such a scenario, compounding can be done without the permission of the court. But if the offense is more heinous or more serious, then in such a scenario, permission of the court is required before compounding of the offense. Now, I have also given you all examples. Say adultery, causing hurt, defamation. These are the offenses which are committed against a person and they are very personal in nature. So, if the complainant himself is willing to compound the offense, the court will not take objection in such matters. But if the offense is serious, like say dishonest misappropriation of property or criminal breach of trust or voluntarily causing grievous hurt, these offenses are serious in nature. Say example for theft. Theft is actually an offense against the society also. It's not personal in nature. But in these offenses, permission of the court is required. There's one judgment, Bhagyan Bas versus State of Uttarakhand. Supreme Court has observed that a court has a discretion to reject the plea to compound an offense having social impact, even if the offense is compoundable under Section 320 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. Merely because an offense is compoundable under 320, still the discretion can be exercised by the court. If you see Section 320 of CRPC, there are two schedules under the section. The first schedule gives you a list of offenses where compounding can be carried out without the permission. There is another list which gives you a list which says that compounding can be carried out with the permission of the court. So I hope I'm clear and I hope I'm able to explain all the difference between plea bargaining and compounding of offenses. So these two things, plea bargaining and compounding of offenses, usually occurs immediately after the complaint is filed or after the charge sheet is filed, because the parties want to dispose of the matter at the earliest. So usually they take opportunity at the earliest and make use of these provisions and dispose of the matter. In case these opportunities are not well utilized, then the trial will proceed and then whatever is the judgment depending upon the evidence which is produced in the court. So we have covered protest petition, we have covered plea bargaining, we have covered compounding of offenses. Now we come to appeal and revision. Now appeal starts with section 372 of CRPC. Appeal and revision, these two terms are also not defined anywhere. But what is an appeal? An appeal is a process of re-examination by a higher court of the judgment or the order or the decision made by a lower court in a suit or in a case. Now here we will deal only with case. Suit will be, civil procedure code, of which I am not aware at all. Appeal is the right of entering a superior court and invoking its aid and interposition to redress the error of the court below. So here it's re-examination by a higher court of the judgment delivered by a lower court. So then how is the revision different from appeal? Most students are confused between appeal and revision. Revision is like reworking and rewriting. Revision means the action of revising, especially critical or careful examination or perusal with a view to correcting or improving. I'll give you all examples and I'll explain you all much more in detail as to what is the difference between an appeal and a revision. So appeals are usually filed after the judgment is delivered, whereas a revision is filed during the course of trial if you are aggrieved with any order. Now I'll give you all an example. For example, I am facing a trial before the magistrate, say for offense of forgery read with cheating. Now the prosecution has started bringing its witnesses. PW1 is examined, cross is also over. And on the next day, the PW number 2 is going to come. So PW means prosecution witness. So prosecution witness 1 is already examined, and on the next date, prosecution witness number 2 is going to come. But before the second prosecution witness comes, I realized that, oh, we have not asked some important question to the first witness. I instruct my advocate that, we have missed out on something important. We should have asked him on this particular aspect, and we should have asked him to produce, say, XYZ document, or maybe his balance sheet or his bank statement. We should have asked. So we make an application in the court to recall the said witness because we have missed out on asking an important question, and that aspect goes to the root of the matter. Probably the reason why I want the bank statement to be produced is I can show in the court and I have paid the money which he had demanded. I have not committed any offense of cheating. So I want his bank statement to be produced. Probably I am not able to produce my bank statement to show that I have paid him the money. So I want him to produce that bank statement. So I make an application for recalling the said witness. If the magistrate rejects my application on the ground that you should have been alert when the witness was there, you had the opportunity of conducting cross-examination, and it is you who have missed out on asking the important question. So he rejects my application. But I am aggrieved. I may have committed a mistake by not instructing my advocate. But I shouldn't suffer. There will be great prejudice caused to me if that particular document is not produced. What do I do in such a scenario? I want to challenge that order of the magistrate. I can file a revision application. So it is an order which is affecting my right, but it is not a final order. It is not a judgment wherein I have been convicted. It is an order which is affecting my right. In such a scenario, I will file a revision application challenging that order of the magistrate. I will file a revision application in the Sessions Court. If the Sessions Court also rejects my revision application, I will challenge that order of the Sessions Court by filing a writ petition in the High Court. But what if that application would have been allowed of recalling the witness? I would have recalled the witness. Prosecution would have called all the other witnesses after that. Arguments were over. The matter is at the stage of judgment. While delivering the judgment, the magistrate observes that I am guilty of 420 read with 467, and he passes an order of conviction against me. I am aggrieved with this order of conviction. What do? I will file an appeal in the Sessions Court. So usually appeal is filed to challenge the judgment or the final order, whereas revision is filed in the higher court to revise the earlier order or to revise the order passed by the lower court. So this is the difference between appeal and revision. Now, in some cases, see, this is a general rule which I explained here. But there are certain acts, like if you go through this Act of Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, there is a clear provision. I think Section 29 of the said Act says that if you are aggrieved by any order passed under this Act by the magistrate, you have to challenge that order by way of filing an appeal. So if in a case where, for example, I have filed an application under Section 12 of Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act for the magistrate, and I have asked for maintenance. However, the respondent, that is the other party, is obviously opposing that application, and the magistrate does not grant me any maintenance on the ground that I am an independent woman and I can take care of my expenses. So he rejects my order for grant of maintenance. Ideally, I would have filed a revision because this is not the final order, but it is affecting my rights. But because Section 29 of the Act says that any order passed by the magistrate will be challenged by way of filing an appeal before the Sessions Court. In such a scenario, if I am aggrieved by that order of the magistrate, wherein he has rejected the grant of maintenance to me, I will have to challenge that order by filing an appeal in the Sessions Court. So there are some exceptions wherein if the Act itself says that you have to challenge the concerned order by filing an appeal, we have no option but to file an appeal. Distinction between the appellate jurisdiction and the revisional jurisdiction of a high court. According to Chapter 29, Section 372 to Section 394 of the Code of Criminal Procedure deals with the provisions of appeal. Now, actually, students themselves, if you all go through these provisions, I didn't want to just read these provisions. The provisions are very simple. If you are aggrieved by the order or judgment of the magistrate, the appeal has to go, appeal against conviction will have to be filed in the Sessions Court. If you are aggrieved by the order of conviction filed by the Sessions Court, you will have to file an appeal in the High Court. So these provisions are very simple and they're very well explained from section 372 to 394. So you all can go through it, and if you all have a query, you all can whole section and put it here in the PowerPoint. Chapter 30, section 397 to section 402 of the Code of Criminal Procedure deals with the provision of revision. The High Court admits the appeals both on questions of law and facts and decides them as well. Whereas in case of a revision, the High Court only decides and adjudicates on a question of law. I will give you one more example. Now, for example, I am a director of a company and I had signed some checks while I was the director of the company. And those checks have been dishonored. We receive a notice. We do not make the payment. The company and all the directors receive a notice for making the payment, the demand notice, as per the provisions of Negotiable Instruments Act. We do not comply with the notice in spite of receipt of the notice. We have committed an offence under the Negotiable Instruments Act, under Section 138. Because we have not made the payment as per the demand notice. So complaint will be filed against us. Now here I was a director at the time when the check was signed and when the check was deposited. So the process will be issued against me. But what if I was a director? I'll give you another example. Like, say the check was issued from our company after I have already resigned from the company. See, I resigned from the company on 1st of June. The check has been issued from our company on 3rd of June and it has been deposited, see, on 5th of June, dishonored immediately the next day. Notice is issued to me also. I do not answer the notice because I feel that I am not a director with the company. Why should I be bothered? However, the complainant files a complaint in the court of law and my name as an accused. I am arraigned as an accused in the complaint. Against me without verifying whether I was really a director on the day when the check was issued or not. I received a summons from the court to come before the court because a complaint under section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act is registered against me. As soon as I get the summons, I tell my lawyer that I was not a director on the day when the check was issued. My lawyer, how will you challenge this order of issuance? By filing a revision in the Sessions Court because it is not a final order of conviction or acquittal. only when it's a final order, we will file an appeal. In this case, we will file a revision to revise the order of the lower court of issuing process against me. We will plead in our revision application that the lower court has committed an error by issuing process against me and that error needs to be set right. So in this scenario, we will file a revision application. But if I undergo the trial and if I am convicted, I will file an appeal. If I am acquitted, the complainant will file an appeal against acquittal. If I am convicted, I will file an appeal against conviction. So these are the provisions of appeal and revision in short. So I think that's all from my side. If you all have any questions, I can answer that.
And the first question is, participant is asking, as you have explained yesterday, that warrant can be issued only in cases about 2 or 7 years of imprisonment. But in civil matters, the summon is issued 3 times, and still if the person doesn't present himself, then a warrant is issued. So will you please explain in this case why is warrant issued?
I shouldn't be commenting on a warrant issued from the civil court. I'll not be the right person to answer that question. What was this question about the criminal court?
Yeah, she said that you explained that a warrant can be issued only in cases about 2 or 7 years of imprisonment. That was the thing that she
No,
said.
I never said that warrant can be issued. What I had explained you is what is a warrant tribal case and what is a summons tribal case. So if the offence is punishable with less than 2 years, then it is a summons tribal case. If the offence is punishable with imprisonment of more than 2 years, then it becomes a warrant tribal case. That doesn't mean a warrant cannot be issued in a summons tribal case. I never said that. I'll explain you. So basically, summons trial and warrant tribal case doesn't mean that in summons tribal case only summons can be issued and in a warrant tribal case only warrant can be issued. The reason why a particular trial is called a summons tribal is because the procedure is not as elaborate as a warrant tribal case. Summons tribal case is for offences which are not very serious because they are punishable just with less than 2 years. Whereas warrant tribal cases are for serious offences.
Okay.
I hope I'm clear.
Yeah, fair enough, ma'am. Yes. Ma'am, next one. Can a protest petition be filed in private complaint cases where it is sent for inquiry under 202 of CRPC?
No, you cannot file a protest petition if it is sent for inquiry and if the inquiry report is against you, you can challenge the order of the magistrate in that case if he accepts the report of inquiry.
The next one is, if the police failed to file charge sheet within 90 days and lower court granted extended time for filing charge sheet to the police, can this extension be challenged in the higher court?
I don't think lower courts have the power to extend this, give extension of time for filing of charge sheet. That's only in special acts that extension can be granted. Otherwise, now there is a judgment of Supreme Court even during pandemic. I think there is a judgment delivered on 20th of July. I think just 2 days back. I think I read it online. Even during pandemic, police cannot take any leverage of saying that, because of this pandemic, we've not been able to complete the investigation and we can't file a charge sheet. If charge sheet is not filed within 60 or 90 days, the accused can apply for bail. And if he complies with the bail formalities, he has to be released on bail.
Right. Next question, can parties go for plea bargaining or compounding after the trial has commenced?
Compounding, yes, but plea bargaining, I don't think so.
The next question is, once charge sheet is filed, immediately suit is instituted and summon is issued, or it takes time depending upon the number of pending cases in court?
It depends if the pendency is high. Sometimes the charge sheet is filed and dates are given after 7-8 months also. Especially in lower courts, magistrate court, sessions court, things are little faster.
Okay. Ma'am, when will you consider that the director have resigned? As on date of passing the resolution or after the filing done with ROC?
As soon as his resignation is accepted by the company, that day is considered to be the date of his resignation.
Okay. Okay. A participant is asking, ma'am, which book do you use for this?
Oh, in college days, now we only refer Bare Acts, of course. But in college days, I always used to refer to Ratanlal Dheerajlal. And all my friends used to laugh on me for reading from such thick books. Believe me, but I wouldn't score as good as my friends.
Okay, so the next question is somebody wants to know that kindly explain which orders are revised by High Court.
So, see, I'll explain you. Now, suppose you're aggrieved by the final order of Sessions Court, you will have to file an appeal. But where there is no appeal, there is no provision for appeal in CRPC. In such a scenario, we prefer a revision in the High Court.
Next one, whether the convicted person can apply for bail before same judge after awarding sentence.
Go again.
Whether the convicted person can apply for bail before same judge after awarding sentence.
Are you trying to say that after he has been convicted, whether again? No. So after he has been convicted, you have to file appeal and you have to make an application before the appellate court. So you will have to make bail and appeal.
Yes. So under what circumstances is writ petition filed, and under what circumstances is PIL filed, and are they directly filed at High Court?
Yes, a writ petition is filed only in High Court because that is the writ jurisdiction of the court. You file a writ petition under section 482 of CRPC. Now, public interest litigation, when a public at large is affected by anything. Say, for example, I'll give you a small example. We stay at Vadala. We have lot of factories around us. And RCF, ONGC, many factories which say, emit poisonous gases. So the residents here are all affected by the emission of that poisonous gases. So when, a lot of public is affected by anything, then they can all come together and in the interest of public, there will be charges affected. It is not me in singular. I'm not the only person who's affected. There is a large public which is affected. Therefore, they all come together and they sign the petition and a public. So, High Court under Section 482 has wide powers. They can take up any matter. I was explaining you. I was giving you an example under Negotiable Instruments Act. Say, I was not a director at the time when the check was issued. In spite of that, process was issued against me. So I will obviously be aggrieved by that order of Magistrates Court. So I therefore challenge that order by filing a revision in the Sessions Court. Now, Sessions Court also has rejected that revision application of mine. I'm aggrieved by the Sessions Court order. What I will do, I will file a writ because there is no provision for second revision. And there is no provision for filing an appeal to challenge this kind of an order. So therefore, what I will do, I will file a writ in the High Court challenging that order of the Sessions Court. So writ can be filed in various circumstances. I'll give you another example also. If a police is not registering my FIR, I had explained you on the first day. If I'm aggrieved by this action of the police of not registering the FIR, I told you we can file a private complaint before the magistrate. Now, if magistrate also rejects my complaint, what do? I will file. There is no provision of appeal. I can challenge it by filing a revision, or I can also file a writ petition directly in the High Court. So, High Court has wide powers under writ jurisdiction.
Okay. So the next question is, when a warrant is issued in someone's case, it gets converted when a warrant is issued in someone's case, it gets converted in warrant case, or is it still a summons case?
So I explained you 5 minutes back also, just because warrant gets issued in a particular case, that case doesn't become a warrant tribal case. It will still be summons tribal only. Why is warrant issued? What is the whole purport behind having these provisions of summons, warrant? So if the person is not remaining present before the court, see, always the first step is issuance of summons. Summons is a direction to the concerned party to come before the court on a particular date at a particular time to answer the charge. So if the accused does not come on that day, then warrant can be issued if the other side makes an application. Let's see, he is available, he is staying at this particular address, but he is avoiding to remain present in the court. The opposite party can make an application for issuance of warrant, and then the court will issue a warrant. So these provisions are there for seeking presence of the parties in the court. Just because a warrant is issued, it won't be converted into a warrant tribal case.
Okay. Now the next question is, what is the difference between a person accused of an offense and person accused of any offense?
I'm not able to understand the question actually. There's nothing called as any offense.
Yeah. It has to be specific, right? Ma'am, which 3-in-1 book have?
I'll explain you one more thing. See, if as a layman, I don't want to appoint an advocate and I want to lodge any complaint before the magistrate. If somebody has abused me, I was taking a walk down on the podium and somebody has abused me over there. I really don't know what offense that person has committed because I'm not a lawyer. So I may go to the court and I will put the substance in the complaint as to what exactly has happened. I will describe the offense, but I don't know what offense it is. I know it is a wrong, but I don't know it is an offense under what section of IPC. So it is the duty of the magistrate to go through the allegations and come to a conclusion that it is an offense under section so and so. So it is not necessary for me to mention the offense in the complaint. It is important for me to describe what the act was, what illegal act has been committed by the accused. Then it is up to the court to take action and decide which offense it is.
Okay. Ma'am, which 3-in-1 book which you mentioned earlier? 3-in-1 book, IPC evidence and CRPC.
It's called a criminal manual. It contains all the 3 acts: Indian Evidence Act, Indian Penal Code, and the Code of Criminal Procedure.
Yes. How many times can we file a bail in 3802 case, murder cases?
Bail application can be filed any number of times. There is no limit to filing bail applications. But you just have to ensure that there is some change of service. Suppose I file a bail application today on the ground that there is no evidence against me. In all probabilities, I will be acquitted even if I'm kept behind bars. So therefore, I should be released on bail. If my bail application is rejected on this ground, and again I make a bail application on the same ground after 1 month, it is bound to be rejected. Though I am entitled to make a bail application again, it will still be rejected. But if I have some new circumstance which has come up, say, my daughter is getting married or my son is getting married, so that is a change in the circumstance. So I can say in the bail application that I want to be released on bail because there is a wedding in the family. So probably my bail application will be considered the second time. But there is no limit.
After the commencement of plea bargaining or compounding, can the complainant or informant again initiate the same case?
No.
Yeah. At the time of issuance of check, he was the director, and when it was bounced, he was not director in that director. In that case, will he be accused in that case?
It depends on facts and circumstances of each case. So,
Yeah.
suppose at the time of signing of the check itself, he knew that they don't have sufficient balance in the account. He probably will be arraigned as an accused, and the court may issue process against him.
Okay. One question is, in special laws, the extension time for filing charge sheet granted to the police by the is granted by the court. Can this extension be challenged?
What
Yes.
was the question?
In special law, under the special law,
Yes,
if the
yes, extension can be challenged.
okay, okay. So we have heard witnesses turning hostile, but what if the complainant turns hostile? Will the possibility of conviction remain same?
No, it can't remain same if the complainant himself has turned hostile. It depends on what kind of what is the credibility of other witnesses. Complainant may turn hostile, but there may be two other eyewitnesses. So it all depends on facts of each case. We cannot have a straitjacket formula like this.
Okay, one question is continuously coming, so I need to take this. A person wants to know that which writ will be filed in higher court if session court rejects the revision or appeal. Which
What?
writ will be filed in the higher court if sessions court rejects the revision or appeal?
Revision is rejected, I'll have to file a writ. But if my appeal is rejected, I may have to file a second appeal in the High Court.
Ma'am, even after NBW, if accused still avoids to come before the court, what steps can be taken?
When NBW is issued, he may avoid to come. Meaning of NBW itself is non-bailable warrant. So it is the duty of the police to go and bring him. So it is for the police to go and bring him. Accused cannot decide whether he wants to come or no. Police has to go and present him before the court.
What is the maximum time for temporary bail? Temporary bail. Okay.
There is no provision of temporary bail. So there is no time limit prescribed in the statute. But mostly temporary bail can be granted anywhere from say 1 week to 2 months, not beyond 2 months.
Okay. Couple of more questions, ma'am. If the offence is non-compoundable and the complainant wants to withdraw his case and court denies for compounding that offence, in that scenario, as being a lawyer of accused, what should I do? As complainant is ready to settle and withdraw his case.
In such a scenario, what we do is advise the complainant that, it's not right for me to say on this forum, but complainant usually turns hostile then, because see, if the offence is non-compoundable, magistrate cannot allow you to compound it. He cannot go beyond the statute, so he'll obviously not allow you. So it is for the complainant to decide. He can turn hostile when he is in the box.
Right.
And it will result in acquittal of the accused.
Oh. Yes. The second last question, in case same judge is there who hears the revision which originally had passed the order earlier in sessions court, can I ask for any other judge to hear my revision petition? What is this? In case same, yeah, I mean, they can, if there is a same judge who hears the revision, who originally had passed the order earlier in the sessions court, can I ask for any other judge to hear my revision petition?
I'm not very clear. This question is not very clear to me, but I will just give a general answer for transfer. You can ask for a transfer. But his question itself is wrong according to me, because if revision is heard by a sessions judge, it cannot come up again before the same judge, because you can't file a second revision. You will have to challenge that order in the High Court.
Yes. And the last question, ma'am.
Yeah. For transfer of revision application or any case also, you can make an application before the principal judge for transferring the matter from one judge to another. Of course, you have to have solid grounds for seeking transfer.
Yes. Okay. And ma'am, one last question. One person says, I think that plea bargaining and compounding can be invoked even after the trial commences.
She has answered this question, Sangeeta.
Yes, but Yeah, that question was, it came again, so I said better put it before ma'am. Uh, he's asking whether he's correct in understanding it this way.
Uh, I don't think I as per my research I didn't come across that this plea bargaining can be taken up at any stage.
Oh,
According to me, plea bargaining is usually taken up immediately after the complaint or the charge sheet is filed, not halfway through the trial. But
mhm.
I think we can all of us can look into it and get an answer for that. Even I'll do some research. That's a good question. So
Hmm.
I'll also look into it. Plea bargaining is relatively a new concept, not being used very often. It's used only in these, factories matters or BMC matters and all. So I think I will also look into it if it can be invoked at a later stage also.
Yes, ma'am, I think that was the last question that we have in the list, and there are no more questions. So I think we can now wind up our session. Before we do that, I actually want to propose a vote of thanks, kind of a very formal vote of thanks, where I really, 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 from the bottom of my heart, not just myself, but on behalf of Nari Gursani Law College and HSNC Board, I thank Advocate Poonam Ankleshwarya ma'am for taking these 3 days of extensive webinar where very patiently she handled. I know the kind of questions which were coming up. You were so patient in answering them, and taking all the time to see that all the participants can understand what they are dealing with. So thank you so much, ma'am, for spending so much time for us and the participants who were eager to learn this subject from you. So a big thank you from Nari Gosani Law College to you. And I secondly would want to thank all the participants who have shown so much of interest in this topic that we had for the webinar, and for the continuous 3 days. I'm seeing that all the participants, most of the participants who were there on the first day, they maintained that attendance, and most of them were there with us till this third day. So thank you, a big thank you to all the participants to show such great interest in the topic that we were discussing. I'm sure you must have learned a lot of things on this topic. If you were unaware, I'm sure you have learned. You are going with a bunch of knowledge from here on this particular topic, which is not just related to law or criminal law, but which is something which every common man must know. So thank you all for attending this seminar and making it such a wonderful, such a successful one. And lastly, I would want to thank the three students of HR College, Harsh Modi, Shubham, and Dhruvi, for the continuous technical support that they were there, and we kept pestering him. I kept pestering all the three of them, and they were always there. A big thank you to all the three young friends of ours, who have been a wonderful support for this event, and you are the one who made it really successful, and we could sail through, these 3 days. So thank you, all the three of you. And with this, I would like to now wind up with this webinar, the 3-day webinar. I would request our principal ma'am to say the parting words. Ma'am.
Thank you, Sabita. I really wanted to come in. First of all, a very big thank you to Advocate Poonam Ankleshwarya. She said that she read Ratan Lal and her other friends used to laugh at her at that time. But had they heard her today, they would have realized the difference between reading some junk and reading a good book. I'm sure none of them could have taken or conducted a webinar like this. So I think it's a lesson to all the students to read standard books. I also want to thank our young students of HR College for all the support that they have given us. And to the participants, I'm sure you have a great takeaway from this 3-day webinar. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening and God bless you all.
Thank you, ma'am. So we part for the day with the view that, in future we are going to come up with lot of such sessions. Thank you once again, Poonam ma'am. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, Samvita, and thanks to all the participants. And I think you all were very patient. And apologies if anything has been missed out. I tried my best to cover as
Not
much
at
as
all.
I can in these 3 days.
Not
Thank you.
at all. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone.